Wide shot. A gray stone fortress rises above a misty valley. Trumpets sound faintly. Torches flicker in the battlements. When we imagine the Middle Ages, we often picture castles, towering walls, drawbridges over moats, banners snapping in the wind. To us, they are symbols of romance and grandeur. But for those who lived inside, castles were less fairy tale and more fortress. For the nobility, lords, ladies, and knights, life was different from that of peasants. They lived with more food, more clothing, more comfort, but their world was no less harsh. Beneath the surface of power and privilege lay fear, violence, and endless responsibility. Stone walls, cold comfort. A castle was first and foremost a military stronghold. Its thick walls and narrow windows were built to resist sieges, not to welcome sunlight. Drafts whistled through cracks. Damp clung to the stones. Even in summer, the rooms were cold. In winter, they were freezing. Fires roared in great hearths, but most of the heat vanished into high ceilings. Furniture was scarce. Rushes scattered on the floor absorbed dirt, scraps, and chamber pot waste. Rats skittered in the shadows. Fleas and lice infested bedding. The noble lived with more space and more food than the peasant. But comfort, as we know it, was still rare. A lord's responsibilities. A lord walks the battlements, overlooking his fields and villagers. To be a lord was not merely to enjoy privilege. It was to carry responsibility. The lord ruled his manor or castle in the king's name. He collected taxes, enforced justice, and ensured the defense of his lands. In return, he owed loyalty and military service to the king. If war came, he provided soldiers, often his own knights and retainers. But rule was not simple. Peasants sometimes resisted. Rival lords fought for dominance. Family members plotted, and always the shadow of famine or plague threatened rebellion. A lord might seem powerful, but his position was never secure. The lady of the castle, a noblewoman, supervises servants, then sits by candlelight, embroidering. For women of the nobility, life inside the castle was both privileged and restricted. The lady of the castle oversaw the household, managing servants, storerooms, and supplies. She ensured food was stored, clothes were mended, children were raised, and guests were fed. She was expected to be pious, obedient, and loyal. Yet in times when her husband was away at war or court, she might also govern the estate in his place. Some women wielded significant influence, negotiating alliances, arranging marriages, even defending castles under siege. But most lived lives, carefully confined by duty and expectation. Their marriages were rarely for love. They were alliances, arranged to secure land, power, or peace. A young girl might be married off at 12 or 13, her future determined before she had any say. The children of nobility, children in fine tunics, run across a castle courtyard, then stop, as tutors call them. Childhood among the nobility was not carefree. Young boys were groomed for war. At 7, a noble son might leave his parents to serve as a page in another lord's household. There he learned manners, riding, hunting, and the basics of combat. By 14, he became a squire, attending a knight, cleaning his armor, learning the arts of war. By 21, if he proved himself, he might be knighted. Girls, meanwhile, were taught the skills of a future lady: embroidery, music, household management, piety. Their futures lay in marriage, alliances, and childbearing. The path of noble. Children was set early and freedom was rare. The life of a knight. A knight mounts his horse. The clatter of armor. Trumpets sound. A tournament begins. The knight, armored, mounted, sworn to serve, was the symbol of medieval nobility. Becoming a knight was expensive. Armor, weapons, and horses cost a fortune. Only wealthy families could afford it. Knights swore oaths. of loyalty to their lords and, in theory, followed a code of chivalry, courage, honor, protection of the weak. But in practice, knights were warriors, often brutal, often violent. They trained endlessly in combat, jousting, and hunting. In peacetime, they competed in tournaments, dangerous contests that could end in broken bones, even death. In war, knights were shock troops, the iron fist of medieval armies. They raided villages, burned fields, and slaughtered peasants often as they fought other knights. Their lives were not romantic tales. They were men trained for war, living by the sword, and often dying by it. The nobility's diet banquet scene, long tables, roasted meats, servants rushing with platters, noble. Diets were richer than those of peasants. They feasted on roasted meats, venison, boar, swan, even peacock. They drank spiced wines and ales, but this abundance had its price. Meals were heavy, greasy, and poorly balanced. Obesity, gout, and digestive illness were common among the wealthy. Table manners mattered. Meals were not just about eating, they were displays of status. Who sat where, who ate what, who was served first. Every detail was a statement of power. Yet beneath the glitter of feasts, the food was still subject to spoilage. Meat was salted, smoked, or preserved in ways that often left it tough and unpalatable. Even the nobility did not escape the risks of bad food and poor hygiene. For the noble, life was also a performance. Clothing displayed rank. Fine wool, dyed silks, embroidered gowns, jeweled belts, all marked wealth and status. Laws known as sumptuary laws even restricted what colors or fabrics lower classes could wear. Castles, too, were symbols of power. Their size, their towers, their great halls, all were meant to impress and intimidate. But much of this luxury was surface. Beneath the silks and jewels, life was still harsh. Drafty halls, flea-ridden beds, diseases that ignored status. Even kings could not escape the frailty of the human body, the constant shadow of war. For all their power, nobles lived in constant fear of war. Castles were built for defense because attack was always a possibility. Rival lords waged private wars. Borderlands erupted in violence. Rebellions and invasions loomed. When sieges came, life inside the castle was grim. Supplies dwindled. Wells ran dry. Disease spread quickly in cramped conditions. Starvation was common. Victory did not always mean survival. Captured nobles might be ransomed, but common soldiers were slaughtered. Villages were burned, crops destroyed, peasants massacred. For nobles, war was both a duty and a curse, profitable for some, deadly for many. Inside the royal court, politics was as dangerous as the battlefield. Nobles schemed for land, titles, and influence. Alliances were fragile. Betrayal was common. Assassination, poisoning, and political intrigue haunted noble families. Marriages were made and broken to secure power. Brothers fought brothers, fathers fought sons. To be noble was to live in constant vigilance, always watching, always calculating, never safe from rivals. Even kings and queens faced rebellion, usurpation, or the blade of an assassin. Religion shaped noble life as much as peasant life. Nobles funded churches, monasteries, and cathedrals to demonstrate piety and secure salvation. Many left vast lands to the church in their wills. For some, religion offered genuine devotion. For others, it was a tool, an alliance with God to justify their power. Crusades called nobles to holy war. Some saw glory and wealth in distant lands. Others saw only death on foreign soil. Faith was both a guide and a weapon in the noble world. To live in a castle was to live behind walls, but those walls did not guarantee safety. Plague, when it struck, did not care for rank. Nobles died alongside peasants. Accidents were frequent, falls from horses, hunting wounds, fires in drafty halls, and above all, mortality was universal. Even kings rarely lived past 50. Many noble children died in infancy despite wealth and privilege. The castle promised protection from enemies outside, but not from the frailty of the human body within. The nobility lived far better than peasants. They had more food, more clothing, more authority. But their lives were not fairy tales. They were bound by duty, threatened by war, trapped by politics, and haunted by death. The castle was not a palace of romance. It was a fortress, a prison, a symbol of fragile power in a brutal age. For peasants, life was toil. For nobles, life was struggle. Different in comfort, equal in fragility. In the next chapter, we leave the castle behind and step into the growing medieval towns, centers of trade, craft, and disease, the birthplace of opportunity, and the breeding ground of plague.